G'day guys, in this video I'm going to show you how I made this chicken tractor behind me. It took me about a weekend to build in the shed. I didn't spend a single penny on it because it was mostly from materials I had laying around anyway. So let's have a look. So chicken tractors come in all different shapes and sizes. And if you don't know what they are, the idea is it's a small enclosure that you keep your chickens in, and they have direct access to the ground, and you just move them around every few days so they get a fresh patch of dirt. And it's good for them and it's good for us because it trims down the grass. They poop all over it, they scratch up all the weeds, eat all the bugs. It's just generally a all-round good idea. So what I might do is just show you how easy it is to move first, and then I'll give them some feed, and then we can have a look around.
So moving is pretty simple. I just have to go around and fold in all the fox netting flaps, and then they pin up to the side of the tractor. So it takes me a few seconds just to go around and do all that. And then it's just a case of lifting up the tractor and moving it. The chickens are pretty smart. Once you've done this a few times, they know what's coming, so they generally get out of the way. But you have to be careful that you don't squash them anyway. And then it's just a case of going back around and putting down the fox net flaps, and then we're good for another few days. So simple as that.
So as you can see, there's two square patches just here, which is where the tractor has been recently. One thing I would say is that you need to move it every few days. I move mine probably twice a week when there's two chickens in there. Obviously if you've got more chickens you need to move it more frequently. But what you'll find is if you leave it in the same spot for too long, they end up scratching up all the grass. You get this sort of bare earth, but you don't really want. You want them to be in there long enough that they can trim the grass, like they have done down this side, but you don't want them scratching up the roots because that kills the grass. And what they'll also do is they'll dig up these little holes where they give themselves dust baths. So yeah, if you leave it in the same place for too long, you get these little craters everywhere. I don't mind too much here, but just something to bear in mind. So in terms of how I did build it, I had a load of scrap timber laying around, and I had a load of fencing laying around from when I took out an old fence here. I just sort of rolled it up and chucked it behind the shed. You always find a use of these things. And then I had a whole bunch of this tin as well. Off topic slightly, but when you buy a shed here in Australia, they tend to clad all four walls of the shed first, and then when you've decided where you want your roller door, they'll cut out a hole for it, which means you get left with half a dozen big sheets of tin. So that was useful to me. So once I collected the materials, and my fencing was about 1.8 high, I basically just sliced it through the middle. That gave me my rough dimensions for how high the tractor was going to be. I sort of limited it to half of that fencing so I could have enough fencing to get all the way around. So what I did was I created two rings, one for the top, and then I created one for the bottom, and then just used some uprights to give them my spacing. After that, I decided I wanted this next nesting box. I was going to make it just straight flat, but then I figured when it's going to rain, the chickens are going to get wet, so I want to put an angle on that. So what I did was I put a little spacer in there, you can see, just to give that some rise, and then I took a length along here to give it the angle, and then when I cladded that I just put the sheet on and then just run the angle grinder down it to cut the edge off. So let me open that up. So if you're like me, you've got boxes and so on of different bits of hardware that you've collected. You can't throw that away, can you? I'm sure there'll be a use for it at some point in the next 20 years. So have a look in the side. So all of my joints are pretty simple. I've only got hand tools, so I can't make any sort of fancy miter joints, so they're all just basically butt joints and then punched in with screws. And then I made up the lid here. And this piece of cabling here is steel cable. It was off the balustrade on the house. So again, something else I chucked in a box and figured I'd use again at one point. And then when that was all clad, I just cut a hole in there for them to get in and out. And then I made a lid on the top, or a door I should say, and that just gives me some access to get in and get the chickens in and out. and top up their water if I need to. So here in Australia, our biggest pest, other than all these wasps you can see flying around, I don't know why there's so many at the moment, they're just everywhere. But yeah, our biggest pest here in Australia is probably the fox. We do have some feral cats and feral dogs, but to be honest, I've never seen them in the 10 years I've been here. I'm sure they're around, I just don't see them. But yeah, foxes are definitely a big problem. You can hear them most nights, and you can see all their droppings everywhere, so they're definitely about. And I've had trouble with foxes in the past. I lost my first and second flocks entirely to foxes. The first flock was probably around 10 birds, and I used to let them roam around the property and lock them up at night. But the foxes were coming out during the day and just knocking them off. I'd even sit in my office looking out the window and you'd see a fox walking past with a chicken in its mouth. So I lost the first flock. And then the second flock, which really, really annoyed me because I hatched them all from eggs in an incubator. You know, I went out and bought specifically the breed of chicken that I want and then hatched them and raised them. Put a lot of time and money into doing that. And then a couple of days after I put them into the coop, which is way down there, probably can't see it from here. A few days after they went into the coop, something got up and over the fence and took all of them. I think there was probably 18, 19 birds in total. But yeah, I went in one morning and they were all completely gone. So either a fox or a cat got in and took them all. So after that, I've been pretty conscious about foxes and trying to keep them out. So what I come up with is this system where I've got fox netting all around the outside. I watched a bunch of videos on YouTube of people doing these, and some people would put mesh inside the tractor itself, but then it limits what the chickens can get access to with scratching and so on. And then when you drag it, the mesh gets stuck and it gets bent and it just becomes a bit annoying, to be honest. So I wanted to keep the inside clear. So what I did is I got some offcuts of the fencing and I basically stapled them all the way around the edge. You can see here there's some larger staple nails every couple of feet. So let me show you at the back, it's a little bit easier to see what's going on here. So we have this bit of fencing stapled on, and then on the edges I added some more that fold in, so that way I could fold in here, and then I could fold in this one, and then I could lift the whole thing up. It gets a little bit awkward because I didn't really trim it very neatly, but I can basically fold that up, and then I've got this little bit of wire here that I can just pin that. It's kind of hard to do one-handed when I'm holding the camera, but I think you get the idea. I just hook it on there, and I do that on all four sides, and that allows me to move them. And then when it's in the right place, I just open these out, and that's quite good because these folding bits at the edges, they give me coverage on the corners, because otherwise you'd be like that. You can put bricks on these to sort of weigh them down. I haven't bothered, to be honest, because if the foxes come in, they're going to be trying to get in under there, and because they're standing on the mesh, they obviously can't scratch away and get underneath. They have to come all the way out here, and they just won't bother then. And I've done a similar thing around my permanent chicken coop. I've got sort of this mesh just laid on the ground, and that's been fine for a good 5 or so years. Nothing's ever got underneath, so I'm pretty happy with how that works. The whole point of this is to try and make my life as easy as possible. So what I did with the ladder is I fixed it to that upright here, and then the other side I fixed it to the bottom, but I gave it enough clearance so it was off the ground. And then I put in these little bars for the chickens to climb on. And because it's fixed to the actual tractor, I don't have to get in and move the ladder every time I want to move the tractor. I can just lift it up and it moves in one piece. So unfortunately I can't give you the plans for this project. Not because I don't want to, or I'm a big meanie, but I just don't have any plans. I was making this up as I was going along in the shed, which I often do. You know, you get in the shed and you put the music on and you get into the zone, you just start working away, and before you know it, several hours have gone past and it's time to go to bed. So I didn't really track any plans for this, to be honest. That's probably a good thing, because I really feel that in the homesteading and the sort of permaculture movement, I guess, that you shouldn't really, you know, go out and buy fresh timber that's been treated and so on. You should really try and make use of some of the scraps that you have already laying around and try and upcycle materials. So hopefully this video will give you more inspiration than actual plans. So hopefully you can go around your property and start collecting some materials and see what you can come up with. That's been useful to you, and giving you some ideas of how you could build one of these on your own. They are pretty simple to do, to be honest. Just do what I did and watch a bunch of videos and then make it up as you go. That's really all there is to it. If you've done one of these yourself before and you've got some comments for me on maybe how I could do a bit better on the next one I build, then please chuck them down in the comments below. I'd love to hear how I can make this better. The only thing I can think of is trying to make it lighter. I definitely went too heavy on the wood. If I had a table saw, I would have ripped some of these boards so they were sort of half the thickness to free up the weight. But yeah, thanks for stopping by.